No nanny could survive a day with the billionaire's triplets, until one black woman did something no one expected. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the Whitmore mansion, followed by screams that could have come straight from hell. When Kesha Williams walked through the golden gates of the $50 million estate, she found three 6-year-old boys turning the living room into a battlefield. Red paint dripped down the white walls like blood. Crystal furniture lay in pieces on the Italian marble floor, and silk pillow feathers floated through the air like dirty snow. But what shocked Kesha most wasn't the destruction. It was the pure hatred in those children's eyes. Another. "Black Nanny!" yelled Tyler, the leader of the triplets, throwing a toy truck at her feet. "Daddy said you're cheaper." Kesha, 32, had never imagined her career as a preschool teacher would lead her here. With a degree in education from Howard University and a specialization in childhood trauma, she had spent 10 years working in community centers, helping at-risk children. But nothing had prepared her for three privileged white boys who had turned terrorizing nannies into a sadistic sport. "You won't last an hour," Dylan sneered, splashing paint on the wall behind her. The last one cried and ran out in 15 minutes. The third triplet, Mason, stayed silent, his calculating eyes fixed on Kesha as if studying the best way to break another adult. Margaret Whitmore, the billionaire mother, appeared in the doorway, her Botoxed face frozen in an expression of superiority. "Miss Williams, as you can see, my children are energetic. 17 nannies have quit in 6 months. The last one was a Harvard graduate, and she left in tears." Kesha nodded calmly, taking in the chaos. "I hope you're tougher than the others," Margaret continued, adjusting her $200,000 pearl necklace. "After all, for what we're paying—" She left the sentence hanging, her smile condescending, as if to say, "You should be grateful for this opportunity." But what Margaret didn't know was that Kesha had grown up on the south side of Chicago, where traumatized children expressed their pain with a ferocity far greater than any rich kid's tantrum. She recognized the signs immediately. These boys weren't demons. They were wounded children desperately testing boundaries. While Tyler hurled more toys and Dylan smeared paint across the wall, Kesha did something none of the previous 17 nannies had done. She knelt down on the floor amid the chaos and began building something with the scattered wooden blocks. "What are you doing?" Mason asked sharply. "Building a fort," Kesha replied calmly, stacking the blocks with precision. "Every war needs a headquarters." For a moment, the boys paused, intrigued by her unexpected response. Margaret's irritation grew. How dare this woman ignore the destruction and play on the floor? But Kesha knew exactly what she was doing. Years of experience had forged a quiet determination the Whitmores couldn't see. She had a plan. "Miss Williams," Margaret's voice snapped, echoing through the room, "I don't think you understand the gravity of this situation. My children have caused approximately $20,000 worth of damage to antiques and artwork." Kesha looked up briefly, nodded, and returned to building. "I understand perfectly, Mrs. Whitmore. $20,000 worth of broken objects, but 3 broken hearts? They're priceless, aren't they?" Margaret's face hardened. "My children do not have broken hearts, Miss Williams. They are spoiled and undisciplined. They need firm boundaries, not this excessive tolerance." At that moment, Richard Whitmore stormed in. At 45, the real estate mogul was known for his impatience and explosive temper. He stopped dead when he saw the room, veins bulging in his forehead. "Margaret, what the hell is going on here?" His eyes scanned the wreckage before landing on Kesha, still kneeling on the floor. "And who is this?" "The new nanny," Margaret said with a sigh. "Miss Williams, this is my husband, Richard Whitmore." Richard looked Kesha up and down with the same cold calculation he used when appraising properties. "How much are we paying her?" The way he said her, as if Kesha were an object, did not go unnoticed. $3,000 a week, Margaret replied. Richard laughed dismissively. 3,000? Margaret, that's too generous. She's probably never seen that much money in her life. Tyler, sensing the tension, chimed in. Dad, she's ignoring our war. Of course she is, Richard said, adjusting his $8,000 Rolex. People like her learn early to bow their heads to keep their jobs. Then Kesha did something unexpected. She stopped building, stood up gracefully, and walked to a broken bookcase. She picked up a book that had survived the chaos and opened it. The Prince and the Pauper by Mark Twain, she said, her calm voice cutting through the tension. Interesting story about two boys who switch places and learn that true nobility has nothing to do with money or birth. Richard and Margaret exchanged confused glances. Why was this woman talking about literature when she should be apologizing for the children's mess? I grew up reading that book in public libraries, Kesha continued, placing the book carefully back on the shelf. My grandmother always said the difference between rich people and decent people is that rich people buy books to decorate their shelves, but decent people read them to decorate their souls. The silence in the room was palpable. The triplets had completely stopped their destructive activities, fascinated by the strange calm of this woman who was not intimidated by their parents. Margaret felt a twinge of irritation. How dare this babysitter lecture her in her own home? Miss Williams, she said, her voice clipped. I see. We didn't hire you to philosophize about literature. Your predecessors quickly understood what their role was here. Oh yes, Kesha replied, returning to her block fortress. The 17 who ran out. I imagine none of them asked why. 3 intelligent, healthy children feel the need to destroy everything around them. Richard stepped forward, clearly annoyed. Listen here, Mississippi. I don't know what kind of cheap psychology you learned at whatever community college you attended, but we don't need analysis here. We need discipline. Kesha smiled softly, a smile that carried years of experience dealing with powerful men who underestimated black women. Howard University, actually. Education with a specialization in childhood trauma. But you're right about one thing. Discipline is important. The question is, what kind of discipline teaches a child to respect, and what kind teaches a child to fear? The comment hit Richard like a slap. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone he considered inferior. You have a very sharp tongue for someone in your position, he said, his voice low and threatening. That's when Mason, the quietest of the triplets, surprised everyone. He had quietly approached the fortress Kesha was building and was now observing the structures with genuine curiosity. How did you know you needed a bigger base for taller towers? He asked, his childish voice breaking the adult tension. Kesha knelt down again, coming to Mason's eye level. I learned that from my little brother. He loved to build things, but they always fell down, until we learned that solid foundations are more important than pretty walls. Where is your brother now? Mason asked, genuinely interested. Kesha's face softened with a shadow of sadness. He died when I was 15, a stray bullet in a neighborhood shootout. The room fell silent. Tyler and Dylan moved closer, drawn by the raw honesty of her revelation. Margaret and Richard glanced at each other, clearly uncomfortable. They hadn't expected the conversation to take such a personal turn. Is that why you're not afraid of our mess? Dylan asked, his voice small and curious. I'm not afraid because I've seen kids who've been through much worse than you, Kesha said gently, and they still managed to find their way back to the light. The 3 of you are stronger than you realize. Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. Well, that's very touching, but it doesn't change anything. My children still need to learn how to behave themselves. I completely agree, said Kesha, standing up. Proper behavior starts with adults showing mutual respect. Children are just mirrors of what they see around them. Margaret felt her blood boil. Are you implying that we are responsible for their behavior? I'm saying that children learn more from what they observe than from what they hear. And what they've observed over the last few months is 17 adults giving up on them as soon as things got tough. The truth of those words hit everyone in the room. The triplets looked down, remembering every babysitter who had promised to stay and then run away. Richard, sensing that he was losing control of the situation, decided to resort to outright intimidation. "Miss Williams, let me be very clear. You work for us, not the other way around. If you can't handle my children the way we want them handled, you can pack up your things and leave right now." Kesha stared him down, her eyes flashing with a determination that made Richard instinctively back down. It was the same look she had held for years while facing racist police officers, prejudiced teachers, and entire systems designed to make her fail. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, her voice calm but loaded with quiet strength, "you are absolutely right. You can fire me at any time, but as long as I'm here, I'm going to treat your children like human beings, not problems to be solved." She turned to the boys who were watching her with a mixture of admiration and hope no adult had seen in their eyes in months. "How about we finish our fort, boys? I have some ideas about drawbridges that might work better than throwing toys, to keep enemies out." For the first time in months, the triplets smiled genuinely, not the mischievous grins of children planning chaos, but the pure smiles of children who had just found someone who truly saw them. Margaret and Richard left, the room huffing indignantly, but not before Margaret whispered something Kesha heard perfectly. "That woman won't last a week. Mark my words." What Margaret Whitmore couldn't imagine was that Kesha had survived far worse than the arrogance of a wealthy family. And every word of contempt only fueled a silent determination that was about to transform that house in ways no one could have predicted. 3 days after the initial confrontation, Kesha had completely transformed the routine of the house. The triplets, who had previously spent their mornings destroying furniture, now woke up early to help her in the kitchen. She had implemented what she called special missions, activities that channeled the children's destructive energy into constructive projects. "Today, we're going to build a bridge that can hold all the toy cars without collapsing," she announced, spreading materials across the dining room table. Tyler, who had grown closest to her, raised his hand enthusiastically. "Can I use the toothpicks to make the main towers?" "Sure, Architect Tyler. And you, Dylan, can calculate how many marshmallows we'll need for the joints." Margaret watched from the kitchen door with growing irritation. How did this woman get her children to cooperate when 17 highly educated nannies from prestigious universities had failed miserably? "Richard," she whispered to her husband, who was reading the Wall Street Journal without looking up, "we need to talk about this nanny. What's wrong with her? The boys are quiet, they're not breaking anything, and she hasn't quit yet. We should be happy. That's exactly the problem. She's changing their behavior too much. They're becoming different." Richard finally looked up from his newspaper. "Different how?" "Yesterday, Tyler asked me if I knew how many people worked at our company and whether they had children. Dylan wanted to know why our house is so big if there are only 5 of us. And Mason..." Margaret paused, clearly uncomfortable. "Mason asked me if I missed his grandmother." The mention of Richard's mother, who had passed away the previous year, silenced them both. The boys had never shown interest in such personal matters before. "She's putting ideas in their heads," Margaret continued. "Ideas about equality, about questioning our position, about what, Margaret? About being decent human beings?" Margaret was shocked by her husband's response. "Since when do you defend nannies who don't know their place?" At that moment, Rosa Martinez, the Filipina housekeeper who had worked for the family for 15 years, entered discreetly with coffee. Rosa had witnessed the dismissal of all 17 previous nannies and watched the boys' destructive behavior escalate month after month. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitmore," Rosa said softly. "Miss Kesha asked me to see if the boys could plant an herb garden in the back of the property. She said it would teach them responsibility." Margaret rolled her eyes. "Of course she did. She probably thinks we're a family of farmers, Rosa kept her face neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. She had grown up in poverty in the Philippines and worked tirelessly to support her family. The way the Whitmores treated Kesha reminded her of her own experiences with prejudiced employers. "If I may say so," Rosa continued gently, "the boys have been calmer and happier since Miss Kesha arrived. Yesterday, Tyler even thanked me for making his favorite snack. That's the first time in 2 years any of them have shown gratitude for anything." Margaret waved her off impatiently, but Richard looked thoughtful. Meanwhile, Kesha had discovered something disturbing about the Whitmore household. During a seemingly casual conversation with Mason while building the bridge, the boy revealed something that chilled her. "Kesha," Mason whispered, glancing nervously around, "do you think it's normal for Dad to yell at Mom every night when he thinks we're asleep?" "What do you mean, honey?" "They talk about money and people who are trying to destroy us. Dad always says some people don't deserve what they have and that he's going to teach them a lesson." "How long has this been going on?" Kesha asked gently. "Forever," Mason replied. Tyler joined the conversation. "Sometimes Dad gets really angry and breaks things in his office. Mom says it's the fault of inferior people who don't know their place." Dylan nodded sadly. "That's why we broke things too. We thought that's how adults deal with being angry." At that moment, Kesha realized the boy's destructive behavior wasn't just spoiled tantrums. It was a reflection of a toxic home environment where emotional violence, discrimination, and abuse of power were normalized. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Kesha did something none of the previous nannies had done. She called her best friend, Dr. Jasmine Parker, a social worker specializing in child protection. "Jazz, I need some professional advice," Kesha whispered from the maid's room. "I'm working for a wealthy family and there are clear signs of emotional abuse. The children are copying patterns of violence they've learned from their parents." "Kesha, you know you need to document everything if you really believe." "There's abuse?" Jasmine said. "Wealthy families have the resources to cover up allegations. You'll need solid evidence." "I know. That's why I'm calling you. Can you advise me how to proceed legally? These children need protection, but I also need to protect myself. The parents have already shown racist tendencies and wouldn't hesitate to destroy me if they found out." Jasmine was silent for a moment. "Kesha, are you sure you want to do this? Families like that can ruin lives. They could make false accusations and destroy your reputation. Jazz, I grew up fighting systems designed to break me. If I can't use my position to protect 3 vulnerable children, then what good is my education and experience?" "All right," Jasmine said finally. "Here's what you need to do. Record conversations when possible. Keep a detailed journal with dates and times. Take discreet photos of any physical evidence. And Kesha, be very careful." Over the next few days, Kesha began to execute her plan. During the day, she continued being the perfect nanny, earning the boys' trust and observing family patterns. At night, she meticulously documented everything. Every incident, every prejudiced remark, every sign of instability. Rosa noticed the change and approached her one afternoon while the boys were napping. "Miss Kesha," Rosa said quietly, "may I speak to you in private?" They walked to the garden, away from prying ears. "You're doing something none of the other nannies ever did," Rosa said softly. "You really care about these children, not just your job." Kesha nodded carefully. "They're good children, Rosa. They just need proper guidance." "I've worked here for 15 years, Rosa said, glancing around to make sure they were alone. "I've seen a lot of things that worry me about how these children are being raised. If you ever need confirmation about certain situations, know that you're not the only one who's witnessed them." It was the alliance Kesha hadn't known she was waiting for. Rosa, with her 15 years of silent observation, could be a crucial witness if the situation escalated. "Thank you, Rosa. That means a lot to me. These children deserve to grow up in a safe environment," Rosa whispered. "And you're the first person who's come here who really understands that." That night, After another violent argument between Richard and Margaret, one the boys pretended not to hear, Kesha made a decision that would change everything. She wasn't there just to babysit. She was there to protect 3 vulnerable children from a dysfunctional family system that no amount of money could hide. As she organized her notes and recordings in the silence of the maid's room, a determined smile formed on her face. The Whitmores had completely underestimated who they were dealing with. They thought they had hired just another nanny desperate for money. What they didn't know was that they had brought into their home someone with enough knowledge, connections, and courage to expose truths that could shake the very foundations of their privileged existence. The next morning, as she prepared breakfast for the boys, who now greeted her with genuine smiles, Kesha knew that each day in that house brought her closer to having enough evidence for a move the Whitmores would never see coming. A move that would not only protect the children, but also reveal to the world who Richard and Margaret really were behind their masks of social respectability. The perfect storm began on Monday morning, when Kesha implemented the first phase of her plan. While Richard and Margaret ate breakfast, discussing their next real estate investments, an unmarked van from the Department of Social Services pulled up in front of the mansion. Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore were greeted by Dr. Jasmine Parker, who presented her official ID. "I am a social worker specializing in child protection. We have received detailed reports of possible emotional neglect and the exposure of minors to psychologically harmful environments." Margaret nearly choked on her $15 cappuccino. "Reports? What kind of reports?" Jasmine opened a thick folder. "Extensive documentation of destructive behavior by the children, regular exposure to violent domestic conflict, and evidence that the guardians normalize racial discrimination and verbal abuse in the presence of minors." Richard stood abruptly, his face red with indignation. "That's absurd! Who would dare make false accusations against our family?" "The evidence includes audio recordings, detailed reports with specific dates, and witnesses," Jasmine continued calmly. "We also have photographic documentation of property damage caused by the children as a manifestation of untreated emotional trauma." It was then that Margaret connected the dots. "It was her, wasn't it? The nanny. That woman was spying on us." Kesha appeared at the kitchen door with the triplets, who now looked like completely different children, calm, smiling, affectionate. The transformation was so dramatic that Jasmine was visibly impressed. "Good morning, Dr. Parker," Kesha said respectfully. "As we agreed, the boys are ready for their individual interviews. They are eager to tell you how they feel at home." "You planned this?" Richard shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Kesha. "You came into our home, pretending to be a nanny to sabotage us." "I came into your home to care for 3 traumatized children," Kesha replied with unruffled dignity. "What I found was a systematic pattern of behavior that any child protection professional would be obligated to report." Margaret tried a different approach, forcing a fake smile. "Dr. Parker, surely we can work this out between civilized people. Our family is well respected in the community." "Mrs. Whitmore," Jasmine interrupted firmly, "social standing is irrelevant when it comes to child welfare. The evidence we have received is too specific and detailed to be ignored." At that moment, Rosa appeared carrying a tray of coffee for the social worker, but instead of just serving, she did something unexpected. "Dr. Parker," Rosa said clearly, "I have worked in this house for 15 years. If you need a witness to the patterns of behavior mentioned in the report, I can confirm every incident described." Rosa's words were the final blow for Margaret. "Rosa, how dare you?" "I dare to protect innocent children," Rosa replied with a quiet dignity forged through years of silent service. "I have watched these children suffer for months because the adults responsible were more concerned with appearances than with their own kids." Richard frantically pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my lawyers. This is harassment. Blackmail." "Mr. Whitmore," Jasmine said calmly. Any attempt at intimidation or obstruction will be included in the official report. I recommend that you cooperate fully with the investigation. As the Whitmores panicked, the triplets naturally gravitated toward Kesha, seeking comfort and protection. The difference was striking. These were no longer the out-of-control children who terrorized. Nannies, they were normal boys who finally felt safe. Kesha, Tyler whispered. What's going on? Mom and Dad are really angry. Nothing for you to worry about, dear, Kesha said gently. Dr. Jasmine just wants to talk to you about how you feel. You can tell her the truth. It's okay. The formal investigation that followed revealed not only the domestic problems, but also financial irregularities Richard had committed to maintain his extravagant lifestyle. Kesha's recordings, combined with Rosa's testimony and the boy's remarkable transformation, built a solid case for emotional neglect. Margaret made one last desperate attempt. You don't understand, she cried. That woman manipulated you. She used our children against us. Mrs. Whitmore, Kesha replied, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. I used my professional training to protect 3 vulnerable children. If that feels manipulative to you, perhaps it's time to reconsider what you call parenting. Within 24 hours, the scandal leaked to local media. The same society that once revered the Whitmores now watched them with scrutiny and judgment. Clients canceled contracts, the country club revoked their membership, and Margaret was quietly removed from all her charitable positions. As his world crumbled, Richard finally realized he had underestimated the woman he had once dismissed. Kesha wasn't just a cash-strapped nanny. She was a skilled professional with connections, expertise, and the courage to take on people far more powerful than herself. The triplets, now protected by legal measures and ongoing professional supervision, finally had the chance to grow up in a safe, nurturing environment. But the story didn't end there. As the Whitmores faced the consequences of their arrogance and prejudice, one question lingered. Could people so accustomed to privilege ever truly learn humility? Or are some lessons taught only through the complete loss of what they value most? 2 years later, Kesha Williams stood on the main stage of the National Child Protection Conference, accepting the Professional of the Year award for her groundbreaking work with families in crisis. Her nonprofit had already helped more than 300 children in situations similar to the Whitmore triplets. True child protection, she said into the microphone, begins when we stop blaming children for reflecting the toxic environments we create for them. In the audience, Rosa Martinez smiled proudly. After testifying in the Whitmore case, she had been promoted to supervisor at an ethical cleaning company that paid fair wages. Jasmine Parker, now a regional director of social services, had implemented new protocols inspired by the case they had built together. Meanwhile, the Whitmores faced a very different reality. Margaret had lost all her social positions and now worked quietly as a department store salesperson. Richard, after multiple financial investigations, lost his company and lived in a modest apartment, struggling to pay child support. The triplets, under court supervision, visited their parents on weekends, but lived with close relatives who provided emotional stability. Tyler became a school monitor, helping younger children. Dylan discovered a talent for math, and Mason wrote heartfelt stories about overcoming adversity. Sometimes, Kesha concluded her speech, the people who need to learn the most about humanity are those who believe that money makes them superior. In his small apartment, Richard watched her speech on television. For the first time, he truly understood. He had completely underestimated an extraordinary woman. Kesha hadn't just protected his children, she had exposed truths that all his wealth and arrogance couldn't hide. True justice doesn't destroy lives, it transforms them. While the Whitmores learned humility through loss, Kesha built a legacy based on courage, dignity, and proof that underestimating someone because of prejudice is the most costly mistake of all.